Welcome to Homeschool Expert. Today we're launching into an exciting conversation about the role of tests, grades, and report cards in homeschooling, and I'm so glad you're here to be a part of it. Many homeschooling parents have asked, what is the point of a report card since I'm both parent and teacher and already know how my child is doing? How do I make use of state standards? And how should I think about the value of tests now that I'm homeschooling? If you're asking any of those questions, well done. This is one of those lessons I wish someone had handed me at the beginning of my homeschool journey, and I am excited to be able to provide training for you on this subject so you can truly homeschool like an expert. Let's get started. Before we launch into the practicals, let's pause to look at the big picture for a moment. When homeschooling parents talk about grades, we tend to have two approaches. The first is that we think grades and report cards are not really relevant to homeschooling. That the point of grades is for the school teacher to communicate with the parent about student progress. And now, since parent and teacher are the same person, report cards are no longer necessary. Some homeschool parents also express concern that tests and grades are not only unnecessary, but that they potentially stifle the love of learning and create stress when learning should be fun. Unfortunately, acting on this viewpoint makes it difficult for students to measure progress or learn how to manage success and failure, which is a real-life skill. Another common approach is when we elevate grades and national percentiles to the highest level of importance. When we feel like A+s down the card get our child that much closer to a happy life, and in some ways validate our role as teacher. Our family lived in Silicon Valley for many years and observed some parents spending a remarkable amount of time and resources training their children from a young age how to test well. Those parents wanted to make sure their children had the resources and help to succeed academically. However, at times, the desire to support their child can become a pressure on that child to achieve, and even become an extension of the parent's own success. This pressure placed on students to achieve is not a new concern, but has been well documented and has been a significant discussion in education communities. I can certainly appreciate both views, the desire to encourage our students to excel and also to foster an environment of love for learning. For parents transitioning into homeschooling for the first time who are accustomed to report cards, this may be a new conversation for you. Perhaps you're already accustomed to traditional grading and are looking for a way to build healthy evaluation into your child's education at home. Taking all that into consideration, what if we adopt a third perspective of assessment? What if we saw grades and report cards as not a trophy or disciplinary measure, but a useful assessment tool? What would it mean if we disconnected grades and report cards from performance baggage, both for students and parents? Report cards and exams would then become a benchmark, a way to measure progress, to make sure our children are progressing and to identify any areas where our children need support. We could use those benchmarks to help our children develop the life skill of setting healthy goals, managing achievement, and learning from failure. Life is full of tests. In the real world, we are always being graded or evaluated, promoted or demoted. It's important to teach our children resilience, how to aim high, as well as how to recover emotionally if they miss the mark. And if we have other students aiming for college, it is crucial to expose them to report cards years in advance to help that transition. Every semester, I give our children report cards that extend beyond letter grades to a holistic view of what they have learned and accomplished that term. In addition to assigning letter grades for school subjects and character focus areas, I write a narrative across categories of character development, extracurriculars, an overview of what we did that semester, a section about that child's strengths, and a section describing a few bullet points of where I'd like him to put more focus the next semester. Finally, I include a quote about what he wants to do with his future, or for older students, insert some of their wisdom on life. My students love it. Color me surprised. I never would have guessed. If I don't turn in their report cards every quarter, they ask about it. They are birthday present excited to see how their hard work has paid off over the last few months. Their excitement at getting report cards tells me we've struck a healthy balance. For our family, report cards and grades are an effective communication tool in our homeschooling. It makes progress measurable. It helps me communicate to my husband how each child is doing each quarter. And it brings each child individually into the conversation so we can coach her together about setting goals and developing character and a healthy work ethic. They enable my children to measure their own growth and motivate themselves. Assessing our children through grades and report cards has enabled us to celebrate their progress and create space for a practical conversation about where to go next in their development. It is not a high-pressure trial. It is an opportunity to grow. Before you launch into grading your student, take a moment to decide what your purpose is in giving your child grades. Is it to give measurable feedback, set goals, show room for growth, and celebrate it? Consider what positive message you can communicate to your child about grades. With all that in mind, let's lay out some practical tools. As we start with report cards, it's important to pause and review a very important point we discussed in Lesson 1. Yours is not mine. Your report cards may not look like my report cards because your child is not my child. I will lay out what I've done for my family and then encourage you to build what works for yours. The goals you established for your child in Lesson 1 come back into play here as you think about evaluations. Did she learn what you wanted her to learn? If so, applaud where she succeeded and provide specific support and guidance where you know she can still grow. Report cards are much more than grades, as we just discussed. They are a chance to set benchmarks. My children may have stuffed their report cards in their sock drawers, but I know for a fact they look back on them with pride. And this is where the narrative element moves beyond letter grades to tell the story of who your student is becoming. If letter grades on a report card feel like more than you want to start with, consider using a check system instead as a warm-up. Moving on to grades. If you're new to teaching, and even if you aren't, it might be a bit of a mystery how to keep track of grades while homeschooling. Historically, grading has not always been a fundamental part of homeschooling, since many parent-teachers were able to assure mastery in their own student, and at the time that seemed enough. As a result, there's a large variance among curriculum companies when it comes to assessment. It ranges between some online or computerized curriculums providing automatic grading, to other curriculums making tests and quizzes available, to some curriculums offering no tests at all. Develop your own healthy philosophy of how you want your family to handle grades and select curriculum that will work well with your decision. My best advice about grades is to keep it simple. There are typically 3 components to grades, and as you may recall from middle and high school, every teacher weighs them differently. So likewise, plan to set your own guidelines. Those 3 components are classwork, assignments, such as projects or papers, and tests. Broadly speaking, younger students often experience their grades weighted more towards classwork and class participation. And older students' grades are often weighted more by assignments and tests, but it's really up to the teacher. For parents considering when to start including grades, I will give an argument for sooner being better than later, and then leave that decision up to you. By incorporating grades in the early elementary years, you accomplish 2 things. First, you begin to acclimate your student to the idea that there are academic expectations at home. Secondly, you give yourself a window of time to practice developing a grading system that works for you before you get into the more critical upper elementary grades, and certainly by high school. As we lead into talking about building a grading system for yourself, I encourage you to look up your state standards of what they expect of your student at your child's grade level at the beginning of the school year. That's a good starting point in keeping realistic expectations of what you should be doing. Let's talk briefly about rubrics, which is a common education term meaning how something will be graded. Many schools traditionally use a percentage system where A's are 100 to 90, B's 89 to 80, and so on. We eventually worked our way up to letter grades, but when my children were in the early elementary years, I used check marks because that was sufficient. I could easily give them feedback on assignment by putting a check at the top to show it was completed, a check plus on rare occasions if they knocked it out of the park, and a check minus if they skipped some of the work or clearly didn't try, and a minus if they skipped or lost the assignment. At the end of the quarter, checks were worth 10, a check plus 11, a check minus 9, and a minus was a 5. I would average them out and give them a percentage. As we added quizzes and tests into the mix, I would average those separately and then average classwork and tests together. This became an instant motivator for the kids, almost like a game. They wanted to win. They know our love for them was not tied to their performance, and just like we cheer for them to score high in soccer, we cheer for them to score high in spelling. By explaining our rubric to our children, they knew practically how to win the game. Children need feedback, both immediate and delayed. If we only give them immediate feedback, they struggle to see the big picture of their growth and become discouraged. If we only give them delayed feedback, goals seem unattainable. It takes both. As our kids move into junior high and high school, consider keeping check marks for homework assignments, but all other projects and tests get numerical grades. I have chosen curriculum that provides me with tests and quizzes, shows me how much each problem is worth when I'm grading it so they all add up to 100%, and it gives me an answer key because that's what I prioritized. You may think differently, and that's great. Even in English, I have chosen a writing curriculum that gives my third grader a list of tasks to complete on each writing assignment, such as correct capitalization, 4 to 7 sentences, correct punctuation, and so on, as you see here. Even though my specific curriculum does not align grade values to those assignments, because it has been clearly organized, I can use that to assign point values for each category she completes correctly. Keeping track of grades requires only a simple sheet of paper, as you see here. Others like entering them into a spreadsheet, which can even be done on your phone from anywhere. With all the balls we are juggling these days, simplicity in your system will be key. If this is your first quarter with grades, put a page in a binder for each of your children and list their subjects down the page. Beside each subject at the end of each assignment, write down that check or grade as it's completed. At the end of the quarter, if you have checks in one column and numbers in another, average them separately and then average them together. Or provide more weight for one category than another. It's up to you. This is just an example. If it's your first year homeschooling, leave breathing room for some early wins. If the best you can do with grades in the beginning is to make your best guess if your student did A, B, or C level work in each subject, go for it. They will still love that you saw their work and paid attention to their growth and need areas. They don't need to see your tally chart to know how you got there. Even if your student is in junior high or high school, give yourself a month or two at the beginning to get the hang of things with warm-up grades. Finally, it's important to clarify that grades are a private thing in our family. I hand back graded tests and exams privately, protect my grade book, and we discuss report cards privately. My husband and I sit down with our children as individuals to encourage, correct, and listen to them as we hash out together what they need to do or receive to succeed in school. Part of why shame has not tainted the grade cycle for our children is that we have provided a safe space to fail and achieve. Of course, when they earn straight A's, they want to hang it on the fridge, call their grandparents, and tell the checkout lady at the grocery, and we're fine with that. On to tests. Around third grade, we begin to include actual tests in our curriculum, math, language, and spelling especially. Except for my youngest, who asked if she could please start having math and spelling tests early like her older siblings. We also begin writing paragraphs and book reports around third grade that earn grades also. How I have come to think of tests is that we are surrounded by them almost daily, if we view test as another word for trial, challenge, or pushing ourselves. While I agree that bubbles and number 2 pencils are rarely used outside of the classroom, the principles of preparing for a challenge, retooling ourselves to digest new information, learning how to cope and perform under pressure, and being capable of accepting both positive and negative feedback about our results are all very practical life skills. Making tests part of your weekly routine may eventually de-emphasize whatever stress you anticipate your child may feel for them. Tests can be anything from asking your child to give you a verbal narrative after reading a book to fill in the blanks, essays, or multiple choice. Variety is helpful, especially if your child has special learning needs, so you can make accommodations. Depending on where you live, your state may require your children to take national exams at some point. Some states allow parents to choose which brand of tests from a short list. And for parents in charter programs, the tests are paid for by the school. While we have certainly complied with our state's requirements to turn in scores every few years, I have actually opted to test my kids yearly for my own purposes. Following second grade, our children take 2 national exams every year that are commonly approved on state lists. This accomplishes 3 things. First of all, it gives my kids practice taking a national exam on a regular basis to help de-stress the process and give them confidence. Secondly, it provides a record of their progress and growth should we ever need to give proof of education. Thirdly, and in my mind, most importantly, the tests provide me with valuable information as the teacher about my child's gaps and progress. A simple glance at the overall scores show me what subjects need a bit more attention in the coming school year or maybe even over the summer. It also provides information to me about whether some training and test prep would be helpful. And as with everything else, my husband and I keep the results private between ourselves and our student, with the exception of the years our district requires that we mail in the scores. Finally, the year-end binder. This is the original tool I used for measuring progress before we included report cards, and is one I continue to use. In Lesson 1, when I talked about the teacher basket, I explained how I keep a folder for each student to save some of their sample work. This is where that comes in handy. At the end of the year, I put together a binder for each student that is a visual summary of the year. I include a few assignments as well as some of the art they have created, their report cards, and state exams. If we go on field trips or build a crazy project, we turn those into a short writing assignment and print it with a photo to go in the binder. My children practically glow with pride at all they have accomplished when I present them with their binders at the end of the year. I love watching them flip to the start and find math pages which brought them to tears that now look so easy, or the way they wrote their names in September that by June looks juvenile. Even in junior high and high school, my students go back to their earlier binders, reminding themselves that what was hard then is easy now, inspiring them that what is hard now is probably going to get easier. They see their own progress without me having to tell them, and they almost always seem to grow another inch just looking at it. Selfishly, it ups my credibility. The next time I give out writing assignments that seem overwhelming or impossible, I point back to the project early in the previous year, especially one where tears were involved, and remind them how hard that seemed then, yet how doable it is now. It's been a tangible means to earn their trust as the teacher. In addition to showing a collection of their work, and this is frankly the part that takes the most time, I do a side-by-side comparison of our state's education standards for their grade level and where our children have met or exceeded them. In the first few years of homeschooling, with my husband being new to the experience, this piece was especially compelling for him and helped alleviate his concerns about whether or not our children were falling behind or getting ahead. It was worth the time not only to make certain I was providing a thorough education for our children, but to keep open communication on the topic between my husband and me. Especially if you choose to never give a grade or test, I highly encourage you to build a binder for each of your kids for 1 year and see what happens. Grading, tests, and report cards are a sensitive topic. Thank you for making time to consider this perspective if it's different from your own, and to consider the value of grading beyond the grades themselves. Ultimately, you are the teacher. I encourage you to do what's best for your child and your family. In our performance-driven world, it is encouraging to me to discover how our children find joy in challenging themselves to grow and in seeing proof of their own growth. Teaching our children to approach and prepare for a challenge, push themselves, give it their best, and make use of the results is an incredibly valuable life skill, no matter where our children aim in future schooling or careers. Report cards are just the start. I never thought I'd be grateful for them, but in many ways it is the highlight of our quarter. As your child progresses and grows, I hope it will be for you too. At the end of the day, it's important that we remind ourselves that the success of our children as students and adults is not a validation of our success as their teachers. Our children are not an end product. They are in process, as we all are. We all face tests and grades daily, even if they aren't printed on a card with A's and B's. Training our children to face life's tests with teachability and confidence is an excellent start. For more resources on tests and grades, please check out the book Homeschool Like an Expert. Thanks for joining me today. See you next time.